Howdo! Time to put some fancy fret markers in this fretboard. Right then, so fret markers. Quite often you can buy a nice circular piece of whatever and then drill a nice circular hole, glue one into the other, and job's done. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to use a cross pattern. So I've printed off this sheet of just a million different sizes to make sure I can get them to fit, so I'm not going backwards and forwards. And I'm going to be using some oak so that it matches part of that neck that we've made. Now, to cut these crosses out, you could use a little hobby bandsaw, but for me it's a little bit fingers in the way, so I wouldn't use a bandsaw personally. A scroll saw would be brilliant. If you have a scroll saw that would get you in nice and delicate details, you could do that quite nicely. I don't have one of those, so I have to go old school and grab one of these. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with the fretboard, I'm going to put some masking tape over those frets that need an inlay, because how many times, too many, have we done the wrong bit? Okay, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to cover that area with the masking tape from fret slot to fret slot. No, 3, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. Count it off. And on here, I'm going to write 12. There you go. Right, so with the masking tape on, and I've trimmed it to the lengths of where the frets go. And I've done that because you can just about, you might not be able to pick this up on the camera, sorry if you can't, but I can just see through the paper at this contrasting colour to see which size I actually want. By the way, mental note to myself, definitely do a guitar one day where it's completely covered frets insteed of doing markers, just complete, because I like that contrasting colour there. I think that's wonderful. Anyway, side note, picking sizes of crosses. So what I'm thinking is one size for these 4, then we're going to have a great big one with an extra little piece in the middle for this, for the 12th, and then a different size for this, so kind of smaller on here, larger on here, and a great big one in the middle. So let's have a look. So I think that one for those markers, hopefully we'll just get that great big one in for that. Yeah, well, that's going to overlap both sides, which is great. Yeah, that one for the 12th. Yeah, right, okay, I think that one for these 4. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut out the black cross and throw that away, and then actually use the hole in here to overlap so that I can use this same shape on all of them. You could do it where you cut the black out and stick the black cross onto the wood, but then of course you can only use it once, and I need at least 4 of these 2 and 1 of those. Right, okay, let's find a sharp knife. So here's something that a lot of people don't think of. Stanley blades or X-Acto blades or whatever company you're using can still be sharpened. Don't think that just because it's gone slightly off that it's not usable anymore, because it is. We can easily sharpen that both sides. So with a freshly sharpened knife, we should be able to just go and not have to press super hard, which is usually where mistakes come from. I want to try and get those rounded edges. Obviously I'm starting with a big one because it's the easy one. I like to start with the easy stuff, gives you extra motivation later on. If you start with the difficult stuff, I think quite often you can just find it so tricky and tedious when you've not quite got your eye in yet that day. It makes you want to give up. Right. There we go. Now a couple of options to transfer this over. One, again, I could go round with the knife just to mark that off. I think what I'm actually going to do is actually just use a pencil, so I've got a little bit of scope when I'm cutting out. There we go. Okay, let's cut that one out. So like we've said, I'm going to be using old school saws like this to cut this out. Now holding this whilst trying to saw isn't going to be that easy just using a vise. The danger I've got here is actually because the grain's running in that direction, at these thin spots here, that's reasonably going to snap. So actually cutting this out could be a little bit of a tricky job. I might even be tempted to put some masking tape down the back before I even start. In fact, let's do that. Right, so with the masking tape on, if that does snap, I can actually just fold it back into place, a tiny bit of super glue in there, and you'll never see the difference because it won't move. So, little tip, put some masking tape when it's fragile. So, how am I going to hold this? Well, with one of these. You've probably seen these on different guitar making video companies, and they even sell them. You can buy them for 25 to 40 pounds, something like that. I decided just to make one. You just need a flat piece of wood for the top, cutting out this little V shape here, so there's lots of area for support as you're cutting through. And then I've put an excessively long bar on here, so I can clamp this into my vise, and I can work right up here at head height if I really want to, or lower it down a little bit. I've got lots of scope with this for cutting out delicate things like these. And let's face it, they're only going to get more delicate as I work down the sizes. Yeah, start with the easy one. I wouldn't necessarily cut this out in one lump first. It's nice to have something to hold on to. So I'm going to work on this side first and then work my way down. So trying to keep the pencil line I want to cut along close to the edge of here so it's got maximum support. I always set my blades to work on the pull stroke rather than the push, because then again it's pulling it down onto this support rather than trying to lift it up all the time. Nothing wrong with using your finger to get right in there. Sometimes a little tricky to get started. There we go. So not completely up to the line. I'm getting close to it, but not completely up to that line. And the reason I'm not going completely up to the line is so that I can come in with files later on and kind of make sure it's got a nice crisp edge to it. Now for that side, I can switch over, use this brace on this side instead. It certainly helps being ambidextrous. Okay, so now we're getting to the really dodgy part. Cutting off this last triangle, this is where things could snap. So I'm just going to go really gentle. Right. Not a lot to hold on to now. Hurrah! It didn't snap. So we can see from here, it's cut out, it's close to the line, but it's not right the way up, and it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So this is where I'm now going to get some files on there, try and make it just neat and tidy, round off these edges a little bit as well. When there's a little bit more meat to take off, I'm taking off this Iwisaki rasp file thing. It's an absolute cracker, this tool. Gentle but super quick and efficient. I'll put a link in the description to grab one of these actually, because they're just superb things. Right, one cross. Right, so now to mark off exactly where on the fretboard this is going to go. I'm going to do these one at a time. What I don't want is a bunch of these hanging around on the desk that's going to get knocked and smashed and then have to recut them all. So I'm going to inlay them one at a time. So I'm going to start again with the big fat easy one. You can see I've put a center line all the way down, and on this fret I've drawn on that 90-degree line. Now that's not necessarily central, I haven't measured it, I've just put it somewhere like, because I just want this to look right. Because of these angles that we've got on these frets, it might not want to sit perfectly central. Which bit's going to be central? It isn't going to be down here, it isn't going to be down here. Somewhere in the middle of here might look right, but because these overlap on both edges, I'd prefer it to just be completely visual rather than measured off. So I'm going to use this straight line either side just to make sure I'm using the same amount that way or that way. I'm not tilting the cross, that's not what I'm doing. I want to keep it nice and straight like this. What do you think? Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, let's go with that. Okay, so very carefully holding this in place. Again with the sharp knife, tucking right into that corner, just lightly. This is one of the advantages of having that masking tape on, is actually I can basically cut the masking tape rather than the wood for now to mark off where this goes. Should have put some masking tape either side of this line, would have been good, but never mind. Very careful switch over. And there we can see it's marked off, cut in. So now we've got to dig that out. Right, okay, so this is probably the tricky part of inlaying anything, isn't it? Great when we've just got those circles and we just need to put a drill hole in, easy peasy, that's fantastic. But for something with some shape to it, gets a little bit trickier. So how am I going to do? Well, firstly, I'm going to go over those lines again with the knife. Without this in the way, so I can just push a little bit harder in that groove that's already there to really establish that line that I want to keep. Then I'm going to go in with a little palm chisel, so it's just one of the flat ones, to edge into that line, so it creates a sunken line in there. Now on a wider section like this, I'm then going to go through with the Dremel router, okay, to give me a flat bottom, so that it's not going to be uneven, it's going to be gluing in nicely. On the smaller crosses that we'll do later on, I haven't even got a router bit that's small enough to fit that, so that's all going to have to be done with tiny chisels and knives and things like that. Hi. You see how we get this edge in here where we have some cut off and then the chisel comes in and creates this kind of fluffy edge here. So again, all I'm going to do is go down there just gently, because that's all it needs, and it just takes those edges off and leaves us a really beautiful crisp edge to work from. So just needed to go around the edges now with the knife again, just to make sure that they're really trim properly. I'd never want to go super close with the router. I just don't quite trust it that it's going to catch something and rip a section off. Like this area here, it would be very easy for that to just pull that edge off and then the whole lot's ruined. Now, one last thing before we fit this. Because we've used the router, it means that that floor of the gap is the same radius as the fretboard, and this necessarily isn't, probably won't be. So easy thing, put some sandpaper on the fretboard, hold that on there and just rub it backwards and forwards a little bit, and it'll just take out that middle section, so you're going to have a better contact at the bottom, none of it's floating. Just being super careful here. I'm just terrified it snaps. Yeah, I think I'm going to call it there. I've almost got touch all the way around. If I hold it on that point, it's pretty much touching all the way through. That's good enough. I'm terrified of it snapping. Right, is that going to fit? Close. Okay, so with a little bit of fettling, we've got it so that that does fit inside there quite nicely. So here comes the bit where we stick some glue in it. So I've just flooded around the edges just to make sure it's all sunk in with the glue. That'll all disappear when we finish it off. So now I've just got 8 more of those to do, getting progressively more difficult as they get smaller and smaller. Right then, so both of those sizes, the large one and the medium, both done exactly the same way. A crisp edge and then go through with the router to flatten off that base. Now then, time to do the really small one. This is too narrow for even the skinny router part to go through it. So we're going to have to do this all with the chisels. We'll start it the same way, a crisp edge, dig into that with the chisel to get into the edges. That will leave us with a little crown in the middle that we'll need to get rid of, and we'll show you how to do that in a sec. Now, I dare say with these tiny crosses, I should probably use a finer toothed blade, but I don't have one. So I think what I'll do is just keep further away from the line and then get closer in with the files. So now with the edges cut out, what I'm going to do is just progressively work deeper. So coming in right from this edge all the way down to cut this line off, and then vice versa, and that will create a little ridge in the middle. There we go, so you can see there's a ridge in the middle where we've been able to come in from both edges. So again, at this point, I'm going to be reaching for some little palm chisels. Here there's a V carving chisel and a little tiny gouge. One of those, probably the gouge I think, will be able to get in there and remove most of that hilltop that's running down the centre. That way that will be relatively flat enough that we can then try and get that extra piece in. Once it's glued in with the super glue, it's not going anywhere. Too fat. V-chisel it is then. Okay, so not a million miles away, but a little bit of trimming to do. So just to put this into perspective, there's my thumbnail. The state of that's ridiculous. Right, so to get this fit, all it needed was just these little corners trimming off so they weren't quite as pointy, and that fits in there rather nicely when it's in. So a little bit of glue, get that set in, and then move on to the next one. Right, and that's the last one in. So you might have noticed as I've gone through on these, I've planed each of these crosses down individually to close to the fretboard. I haven't gone flush. I didn't want to do that with each individual one because you're going to end up with a fretboard that weaves like that as you take too much stuff off. So now that I've got it all down so it was non-knockable as I was working, I'm going to get the big long plane out again and just really fine go over all the tops of these until we get a nice flush finish with the fretboard. And then there's one last thing to do to finish this off at the 12th fret. So I'm using some gold leaf in this little center crown here. So a tiny little whisper of the stuff here. Now you can buy special gold leafing glue. I don't use that. What I do is I use a UV resin because it just lasts forever. It's brilliant stuff. It comes with a little kit like this. You can put a UV light on. It's great. So I tend to put a little bit of this in the bottom of the hole, pretty much make it go off with the UV light. Then the gold leaf sticks to that really nicely, and then flood the rest of it with the UV resin, and then flatten it off. It's really, really simple stuff to use, and looks really nice, looks quite classy with a bit of bling in there as well. Can you see how we just want to fractionally overfill that as well? Because it does shrink a little tiny bit once we get that UV light on. And there we go, one crown logo. Once that's got some finish on it, that'll really pop. And of course, one of the best reasons to use a plane throughout all of this process is that this then doesn't need any sanding. We might go over this with 600 and 800 grit at the most. It doesn't need anything less than that. Quite often the plane itself is absolutely pristine. Right, well, if you enjoyed that video, make sure you check out this one because I think you'll love that one as well. And until next time, sharpen your tools and I'll see you soon. God bless.